So today we're diving into something really interesting, a brand new open source toolkit from GitHub called Spec Kit. And the promise here is huge. We're talking about completely flipping the script on how we build software, which could change not just our daily workflows, but maybe even what it means to be a developer. Let's get into it. Okay, let me start with a scenario, and I bet a lot of you have been here before. You spend ages crafting that perfect specification document, right? Every little detail is mapped out. But then, the minute the actual coding begins, that beautiful spec just becomes an artifact. It gets out of sync almost immediately and ends up just, gathering digital dust. Sound familiar? To really get what Spec Kit is trying to solve, we first have to talk about the problem itself, which is that traditional software development process that, let's be honest, most of us are still using. For decades, that spec has basically been treated like scaffolding. It's the blueprint you need to get the frame of the building up for sure. But once the walls are in place and the real work of coding starts, that blueprint just gets tossed aside. It served its purpose, and now we move on.
But what if we could just fundamentally change that relationship? What if the specification wasn't just a guide you glance at, but was the actual engine that drives the entire project forward?
And that brings us to the big idea here, spec-driven development, or SDD. The core concept is this. The spec is no longer just a static document for developers to read and interpret. Instead, it becomes an executable artifact that directly generates the code. This is huge, because it means the spec and the code can never drift apart. One literally creates the other. In this comparison, it just nails the paradigm shift. You're going from specs as disposable scaffolding to specs as the core engine of the project. We're replacing what the creators call vibe coding, where you're kind of just feeling your way through the code based on a vague guide, with a super precise intent-driven implementation. The what gets locked in, and then it gets built. Okay, this all sounds amazing in theory, right? But how do you actually pull it off? How do you make a document executable? Well, that's exactly where GitHub's new toolkit comes into the picture. So GitHub just released the Spec Kit. It's a practical, open-source set of tools specifically designed to take this whole philosophy of spec-driven development out of the clouds and put it right into your command line. So what is it really? Well, it's a toolkit that helps you define product scenarios, what a user actually needs to accomplish. And instead of just coding from scratch and hoping for the best, you use an AI coding agent like GitHub Copilot or Claude to read your structured spec and generate the code. The whole point is to get predictable, consistent results every single time. So what does this actually look like day to day? Let's walk through the workflow you'd use if you were starting a real project with this thing. The whole thing is broken down into these 6 really logical steps. First, a simple one-time install. Now, step 2 is critical. Before any code gets touched, you establish the project's guiding principles. Then you define the spec, the what. That's followed by a technical plan, the how. From there, the plan gets broken down into small, actionable tasks. And only then, at the very end, do you let the AI actually implement the solution. And the way you interact with all this is through these dead simple, AI-powered slash commands right inside your coding agent. You'd start with /speckit.constitution to lay down the ground rules. Things like, we're using TypeScript, or all API endpoints must be RESTful. From there, you just work your way down the list. You specify what to build, create a technical plan, break it into tasks, and finally, you hit /speckit.implement. It's like having a structured conversation with your AI partner. But it gets better, because there are also these fantastic commands just for quality control. You can ask the AI to clarify any vague parts of your spec, analyze it to make sure everything's consistent, or even generate a checklist to validate your requirements. It's basically like running unit tests, but on your plain English specification. How cool is that? Now, I know what some of you might be thinking right now. Isn't this just another fancy prompt for a code generator? Well, the philosophy behind it shows it's actually designed to be way more robust than that. See, this is not about some magical one-shot prompt that spits out perfect code. No way. It's a multi-step process of refinement. By forcing you to separate the what from the how and establish those guiding principles up front, you're creating guardrails for the AI. And that structure is exactly what helps you avoid the common pitfalls and hallucinations you get with those simple one-off prompts. And don't think for a second this is just for greenfield projects, building something totally new from a blank slate. the documentation shows it's just as powerful for brownfield work, like when you have to add a new, complex feature to an already existing system. It even supports what they call creative exploration, like quickly prototyping a new feature in a few different tech stacks just to see which one feels best.
All right, so you're probably thinking, this sounds pretty cool. What do I actually need to get started and try this out today? Well, the good news is the list of prerequisites is pretty much standard stuff for any modern developer. You need a standard OS, an AI coding agent like Copilot, the UV package manager, a recent version of Python, and Git. If you've got that, you're pretty much ready to roll. Ultimately, when you boil it all down, it comes back to this one simple but really powerful promise from the project itself. The whole goal of spec-driven development and the Spec Kit is to help you build higher quality software and do it faster by making your intentions clear, structured, and executable. And that really leaves us with a final big thought to chew on. This approach could totally change our creative process. It elevates the developer's role from someone who just writes lines of code to someone who architects clear, unambiguous intent. Your main job becomes crafting the perfect specification. So the real question is, if your spec could handle the coding for you, what amazing thing would you build first?